Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Today, we do not have our internet, so I will be visiting with Daniel by phone in order to get you today's message. There's always a message to be delivered. Nothing new and startling. It's just startling because it's a continuation of a lot of nonsense when it comes to what's going on with the coronavirus, lockdowns, and many other things. And of course, there's a lot of talk about, but less so now, about the counting of the votes from the election. Though we'll deal with that. But Daniel, you're remote right now, but welcome to the program today.
Happy Monday, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Doing fine. So I'm going to start off with something about California. The Huntington Beach was in the news because they were having a lot of people show up and they challenged the curfew. And I think they were advertising, or at least insinuating they were having a beach party. And part of the beach party was going to be burning the mask. Now, under some other type of conditions, that if this was the goal to save lives, you couldn't make joke of it, but we don't happen to fall into that category. And when you think about it, I see this as a bit of information. The people do know and eventually catch on. They might go a long time without realizing what's happening. But right now, the people are catching on. There's more resistance. And I think this Huntington Beach is a resistance. They're turning out. But it also calls attention to that favorite governor out there in California. Everybody just loves him. I mean, they love to get rid of him is what they do. Someday, that might even happen. But he has these curfews that put out. And I think out of 58 counties, 41 counties are under curfew. But the other good thing, not only do the young people realize what's going on and they're ready for this to stop, the sheriffs, which are, in theory and in reality are very important. They say, we're not going to go knocking on doors to find out what's happening on Thanksgiving and Christmas. So the sheriffs are waking up with the people. They're close to the people, a lot closer than the federal bureaucrats and the people in Washington, D.C. managing our affairs. So I think that is good news that the sheriffs are resisting. And I have been saying for quite a few weeks now that I think the revolt is really going to come from young people because they like to go to the beach. Now, that sounds overly simplistic, but it may have a serious meaning there to it, because if they thought for a minute that they were going to die or increase the odds of them dying from going to the beach and getting coronavirus, I don't think they'd be, demanding that they can go to the beach and open up. And then all of a sudden afterwards, then when everybody anticipates that the guys are trying to scare us to death, don't have any facts to say, oh, look at what's happening. They're doing so much harm. But anyway, Daniel, I think this news, we could put a good spin on this, but we still need to wake up a lot of people.
It's interesting what's happening in California because it is a mini revolt, and a lot of it has to do with Governor Gavin Newsom's own hypocrisy. He issued the insane orders about Thanksgiving, which we've highlighted on the show several times. Ridiculous. He gives you permission to use your own bathroom, but you have to clean it constantly. It just goes down the list of how insane it is. And then he was caught in a restaurant, French Laundry, up in Napa Valley, which is one of the most expensive restaurants in the country, with a very large group dining indoors, and no one had a mask on. And so when he was called out for his hypocrisy in doing this, Cheryl Chumley, who writes for the Washington Times, she put out an article that we have up on Ron Paul Institute's site where she calls it an act of revenge. What he did right after that is said, okay, California, you're all going to be on curfew from 10 o'clock at night until morning. You're on curfew. And if you think about it, the logic of that is insane, because if the purpose is to prevent the coronavirus, is he saying that the coronavirus comes out only after 10 p.m.? It makes absolutely no sense at all. The good news, you're right, is in Huntington Beach and elsewhere, there are protests. there is also a pretty robust recall movement. And if you remember a couple of decades ago, Gray Davis was recalled in California. So it's not unprecedented for Californians to get rid of a governor they can't stand. And I think Gavin Newsom is pushing them to the edge of that with his hypocrisy and his totalitarian approach.
You know, the other side of the country is not doing a whole lot better when it comes to governors. There's a governor in New Jersey that I don't believe could be declared a lot better than California, but he got caught in hypocrisy. Can you believe that? He wasn't even following his own rules. But I'll tell you what, he got reamed out. In many ways excessively, but I guess in theory and what the person was complaining about, using a little bit of strong language, but somebody that was really hacked off with him and going out with his family indoors, enjoying themselves. What right does he have to do this? This is the whole reason. This is what true punishment should be. You know, that's how I assume that for the moment, that everything's declared. A lot of it is fake, and people are acknowledging that, and they're caught red-handed. What should the punishment be? Well, the people who orchestrated it, designed the laws, and forced it on the other people, they should be made to suffer with those rules that they wrote while the other people go free.
Well, people are losing their livelihoods. They're losing their lives. They're getting frustrated. Nothing makes sense. They're told they have to lock down. But the lockdowns don't seem to work. So you got to do it again. You got to do something again that doesn't work. And so when they saw Governor Murphy out there having a dinner with his large family without masks on, everyone is enjoying their dinner while everyone else is suffering. Yeah, he was confronted. And, you know, you and I wouldn't appreciate that kind of confrontation, especially the language. But I think the frustration of the people over the hypocrisy of the so-called leaders is almost reaching a boiling point. You know, we have Lightfoot in Chicago, who it's okay to go and celebrate a Biden victory, but you better not have Thanksgiving with your family. Pelosi, I can get my hair done, but I'm shutting down the rest of the hair salons, and on and on and on and on it goes. And people are seeing now what's happening. And I think there's a real anger swelling up in the United States.
You know, I saw a headline. I was thinking, oh, this sounds like good news. We're winning a Fauci over to our side. And he comes out and he said, Fauci says that immunity possible reasonably quickly. Wow, that sounds good. He sounds like he's endorsing this whole idea of herd immunity. But when you go on and read it, it said, if enough Americans just flat out do as he tells them and take the vaccine. So that is rather ironic that he's using sort of terms, but he's been all over the place. He's actually changed his positions. But this whole idea that they know what's best for us, and right now I still think the surfers know more about what's best for them.
Well, it was just a couple of weeks ago that we were talking about Fauci and Birx attacking Dr. Scott Atlas for even using the word herd immunity. The concept, they said, is a conspiracy theory, and they ridiculed Atlas. And now all of a sudden, herd immunity, they act as if it was never even controversial. Yeah, we'll get herd immunity if everyone takes a vaccine. Well, what a vaccine does, you know, I have to tell you, Dr. Paul, you know, is it just simply mimics what happens in nature, which is that people develop antibodies when they're exposed to an illness, and that stops the virus in its tracks. So really the virus, a vaccine, if it works properly, simply aids the natural immunity process. But they were actually denying that there is a natural immunity process. And now, hey, don't listen to what I said a couple of weeks ago. Herd immunity is possible, but get that vaccine.
We at times have been accused of participating in a debate that there is no debate. The science has settled it, and many people have used that. But, you know, I think there's still a debate going on between two physicians and academicians dealing with the tests for coronavirus. And to me, those two individuals is Mike Yeardon and Neil Ferguson. And they both worked for Pfizer. But Yeardon is no longer with Pfizer, but he's writing out, and he takes the position that, you know, the test is unreliable. We've talked about the reliability of the test. And the more I read about that, the more foolish it seems. But he has written some really good stuff, and people ought to take a look at it. Zero Hedge has something on there today on the he really documents what he says. But then we have then we also have Ferguson, who he was the great academician who came out and he instigated all this. And you'd think he'd be fading by now, but no, it serves the agenda, who seem to think that there are some benefits, from lockdown. So he's still in the news, but scientifically, there is an argument between the two, because one says that you have to have all this testing in business. The other one says it doesn't do any good. But then once you start that debate, then you have to get into motivations, because both sides will challenge the other side. I happen to come down just by reading as much as I can that my ear is on the right side of this argument, and that it means that the testing is not good, is not reliable, and that's been his argument. And he talks in the statistics why he believes that is the case, and he backs it up with scientific facts. And I would think they'd be more open to that, but nevertheless, there's a lot of people who will go along and they like to do it. This whole idea about Illinois, eliminating thousands of beds. Why would they do this? Isn't there an epidemic? Are they short? No, I think they were afraid that the beds would be empty. So they took them and they took thousands of beds out. What do you think that did to the statistics? The hospitals are full, they're overrun. And anytime the hospital's overrun today, it's sort of like the way they look at deaths, it's due to COVID. So they eliminate the beds, and that's sort of the way they fudge the statistics on the death rate and the infection rate. They change the rules and they deceive the people. That's why the real challenge is the common sense of the common man waking up and challenge the uncommon sense with the uncommon scientists who claim that, the end of the world, the Fergusons of the world. They have to be challenged intellectually and say that they can be disproven. But so far, organized politicians and even in the scientific community still stand behind the nonsense. And if you ever put two of those people up in a real debate, I think the people defending, science from a viewpoint that we share, I think they would have no trouble, winning the debate.
Yeah, it is a big debate, and but the issue is, and this is the Dr. Yearden, who was a chief science officer for Pfizer, points out that if it wasn't for the media amplifying constantly the new cases, which case is just a positive test, people wouldn't really know that there was a so-called pandemic going on. You add to that the face masks, and you've written about that this week in your column. The study that came out saying that they really aren't doing what they were promised, that study that was done in Denmark. If it wasn't for those two things, people wouldn't really be afraid, because yes, there are hospitalizations right now. It's the beginning. We're in the middle of the fall flu season, but it's the media hyping. And he points out that the PCR testing is just, and he's not alone. This is, we talked about it before. Fauci himself said anything above 35 cycles, which is where they magnify a little tiny piece of RNA, a little fragment, and they take 35 cycles. Anything over that is just dead material. You can't culture a virus from that. But the U.S. routinely does 40 cycles, 40 doublings, which equals a trillion times amplification of this little tiny bit. And that's why you're getting, and even the New York Times reported maybe even 90% false positives. But having a lot of false positives certainly gives the impression that there is a massive increase in cases without explaining the context. And on this situation, it really is the media and the politicians who are the conspiracy theorists. They're the ones who are colluding to make this something that it's not, and actually to cost more lives than if they had accurately reported it.
I think Yearden indicated that nearly like 70% of them are false positives. And just think of the ordeal, that the people go through with this. And people say, well, we have to do what's right and we have to listen to them. Just think, and they never have yet added up, because it's so huge, the real cost of lockdowns. And yet that's what they're so anxious to do. And the insanity of having the sheriffs go on and check and finding out how many people you have in your house for Thanksgiving. Thank goodness people are waking up. Enough is enough. But they should have awakened months ago when it said, well, there's something wrong with this. Why is it that people aren't allowed to go to church? And why are the people who are defying and going to church aren't, necessarily any sicker than the rest of the population? So it's a real tragedy of what's going on and the real cost of this past year. And if we don't straighten out and change our policy to a more sensible one, I'll tell you what, the cost is going to go way, way up. And we're in the middle of it. And it's just utterly amazing that they can come up and concoct these things and let these governors get away with it. The pure hypocrisy. They do this and they just defy it, but they'll get caught. Even Nancy Pelosi, can you believe that? The Speaker of the House pulling on something like that? I thought she was much more honorable than that.
Well, the funny thing is that Yurden is controversial and Ferguson is not. But it's Ferguson who's been so spectacularly wrong. He warned about 2.2 million people dying in the U.S. of COVID. He also said that Sweden would pay a terrible price for not having a lockdown. He predicted 100,000 dead Swedes by June. Well, their death count now is just under 6,000 total. So that's off by a factor of how many. So here's a guy who's always wrong, who's completely wrong, yet somehow he still is accepted as preaching the gospel when it comes to this, and voices that are challenging some of this with just objective facts are being blackballed or being silenced or being deplatformed. So it really is kind of an Orwellian world.
Before we go, Daniel, I want to talk a little bit because I'm still sorting it out exactly what's going on. And that has to do with Sidney Powell. She has a good reputation and we were expecting high things. And maybe we still will see these things. But all of a sudden, she was saying things controversial, and all of a sudden she's gone, from the administration, and you wonder, there's two choices. She was way, off the track and way out of bounds, and therefore not worth keeping around just for all kinds of reason, or she was really on to something, or a little bit of mixture of stuff. What if she is really on to something and knows something about, the corruption in voting? And then to me, the numbers are just astounding. And I don't know anything about the technique of collecting these votes. And it's just too complicated to try to challenge people like that. But this whole idea that so many people in this country, and it doesn't mean they're all Republicans, say there's something wrong with this system, and it doesn't involve 100 votes here and 100 votes there. And it's really nothing new. I've mentioned before, the first election I ever was in back in 1976, I lost by 100 votes. We had a recount, and then I lost by 1,300 votes. Then I proved there were more than that who cheated, and took it all the way to the state Supreme Court, and I was winning all the court cases. And finally, at the last minute, the judge was mandamus. He was taken off the case. They had another vote, and the election was settled. So that's been around, and LBJ knew something about cheating. So the cheating is something that exists. This might be one of the arguments that libertarians who aren't all that excited about democracy don't think that the democratic process, the dictatorship of the majority, all you have to do is manipulate the majority and you become the dictator. And if you could have a system where you just pass out stuff, lo and behold, you can get a majority put together. I want my stuff, but I'll vote for you. And then what happens when both political parties are passing out stuff? Well, it usually ends to a bad bankruptcy. And of course, that's what I think we're approaching.
Yeah, it is hard to figure out what's happening with Sidney Powell. There are a lot of different theories. One theory is that the Giuliani team, the team that's officially with the campaign, is focusing on mail-in ballots where there is apparently a lot of shenanigans going on, and also with refusing to allow Republicans to monitor the count, and that Powell is focusing on the manipulation of the voting machines, the electronic manipulation of the voting machines. So that's one theory. The other theory is that she's raising money separately, and she's not being paid by the campaign. And that's what she said. She's never been, officially part of the campaign's legal team, even though she did appear at that press conference with Giuliani a few days ago. So there are a lot of questions about it. I mean, personally, I think there's probably something interesting about the manipulation of the machines, but I find her going off on a tangent about Venezuela and Serbia being involved as being pretty far-fetched. I don't think she understands what happened in Venezuela, for example. I don't think that Hugo Chavez was rigging the vote to get reelected. So I think she's off on a tangent, but she probably should refocus. It's hard to say, but you know what's interesting, Dr. Paul, is that the Trump campaign, the Trump people are being demonized as being anti-American and anti-democracy for challenging the vote, when in fact it was Biden's own chief of staff in 2016 who was part of the move to challenge the 2016 election on behalf of Hillary Clinton. And of course, we know that that Al Gore challenged the 2000 election. So there's a long precedent of this, and there's some hypocrisy among the people who not long ago challenged it when their people lost, and now saying that you don't dare challenge in elections. They're sacrosanct. You hate America if you challenge them. And now that the guy they hate has lost. So, you know, in the media, unfortunately, now we're lockstep for the most part on one side. So nobody's getting proper information.
Yes, and I think it gets more confusing for me when you start hearing about and knowing a little bit about Dominion, and also the smart master. You know, the collection, the technology that gets complex. But then when I see Soros's name popped up, and of course, he would say, "I have nothing to do with it, nothing to do with it," but it smells bad for some reason, and I just hope, you know, long term, I don't expect magic to happen, that tomorrow the country's going to wake up and we're going to restore the republic and we're going to have honorable election. But I really, really would like people to work on the idea of knowing. I'd like to know how many votes were stolen. I happen to think there was probably a lot of mischief going on, but I'd like to know it, even if it doesn't change the election. They say, well, what good is it if it doesn't change the election? Well, maybe for the future, maybe setting a standard. And I think of it that way, because there's a mixed bag there. We don't have all the evidence. Heck, we can't even sort out science, which I think is a lot easier, finding out who's telling the truth about the tests that we're running for coronavirus. That should be a lot easier than figuring out the lying and scheming of the politicians. When you see the arrogance of the politician writing these laws that will take care of us and protect us, and then they, right in front of us, they hypocritically just spit in our faces by going out and violating all the rules that they make us live with. So that to me is a challenge. I think, Daniel, if we pursue this course of trying to find out the truth about things, I think we have a big job ahead. I think we're going to have a job for a long time. But and that's why we're always searching for something that's positive and good, so that we can say, well, here's a spark. Because I still look at the situation where most people are decent. The big problem is the people who get in leadership positions and work their way up. They have a goal because they're evil, and they get in those positions, and then they write the laws and they make the money and they scheme, but they just then have control and manipulate the majority to go along, and that's where our problem is. So it's to me, it's back to ideology, and I still believe in that old-fashioned issue of personal liberty and personal responsibility.
Yeah, that's true, Dr. Paul. And I would just close out, if I can, by saying one silver lining, I guess, in this, if we have to find one in the election fiasco, is that if any time in the future the U.S. starts criticizing elections in another country, they're going to be laughed out of the room. They're going to be laughed out of the embassy or wherever they're from. So, 70 million Americans don't believe that the elections were fair, and that's a pretty considerable amount of people, and that's a pretty dangerous thing when you have that many people feeling like they've been disenfranchised. So we're heading into very troubled waters, Dr. Paul.
Very good. Yeah, and I want to thank you, Daniel. I want to thank our viewers for tuning in today. That is our listeners for tuning in. Sorry we didn't have our video today, but that should be fixed by tomorrow. But thank you very much for the support and for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.